Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. Wassalatu wassalamu ala khatim al-anbiya'i wal mursaleen Sayyidina wa Nabiyyina Muhammad wa ala alihi wa sahbihi ajma'een. Allahumma aftah lana hikmatak wa anshur alayna rahmatak wa zidna ilman ya kareem. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. This is our final lesson of our commentary on Risalat al-Jami'ah. Walillahi alhamd. In this final lesson, we'll be continuing with our discussion on purification of the soul. The author here is moving on to talk about the limbs of the body. In the previous lesson, he was talking specifically about the heart, and now he'll talk about the limbs. So the 7 limbs that he had talked about again were the stomach, the tongue, the eyes, the ears, the hands, the feet, and the private parts. So these are the seven parts. And then he'll mention disobedience or acts of disobedience that are related to the entire body, and other forms of disobedience as well. We said that the reason for mentioning disobedience of the heart before disobedience of the limbs is that the limbs are under the control of the heart for the most part, and that acts, irrespective of them being in obedience or in disobedience, they tend to act in accordance to the heart, and they don't act unless it wants them to. And that's why the Prophet ﷺ said that there's a piece of flesh in the body that if it's good, that the rest of the body is good, and if it's bad, the rest of the body will be likewise. So the limbs that we're going to mention, the entire body is under our control, and we're responsible for all of them. So we're not only responsible for them, but on the Day of Judgment they'll testify for or against us as well. The Quran says, يَوْمَ تَشْهَدُ عَلَيْهِمْ أَلْسِنَتُهُمْ وَأَيْدِيهِمْ وَأَرْجُلُهُمْ بِمَا كَانُوا يَعْمَلُونَ. That on that day, that their limbs, their tongue, their hands, their feet will all testify against them, or testify as to what they used to do. Right? So these are all blessings from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, so we can't use them for ways that would earn divine displeasure. Right? The author says, وَأَمَّا مَعَاصِ الْجَوَارِحِ, that with respect to the limbs, or the disobedience of the limbs, فَمَعَاصِ الْبَاطِن, the first one that he'll talk about is the disobedience of the stomach. So he lists a few things that are related to مَعَاصِ الْبَاطِن. He says, مِثْلُ أَكْلِ الرِّبَا, like riba or interest, وَشُرْبِ كُلِّ مُسْكِرٍ, that consuming anything that intoxicates, وَأَكْلِ مَالِ الْيَتِيمِ, وَكُلُّ مَا حَرَّمَ اللَّهُ بِهِ وَكُلُّ مَا حَرَّمَ اللَّهُ عَلَيْهِ مِنَ الْمَأْكُولَاتِ وَالْمَشْرُوبَاتِ. So the first thing that he mentions is riba or interest, and the Prophet ﷺ mentioned riba or interest as one of the sins that destroy, or that are destructive, that destroy a person in this life and in the next. And the Quran comes down very hard on riba. Right? It says, يَا أَيُّهَا الَّذِينَ آمَنُوا اتَّقُوا اللَّهَ وَذَرُوا مَا بَقِيَ مِنَ الرِّبَا إِن كُنتُم مُؤْمِنِينَ. That if you're actually believers, that leave aside what remains from riba. So it's intending to insinuate that if you don't leave off riba, that you're not actually a believer. And it makes a bit of a mockery of people who take riba. It says in Surah Al-Baqarah, it says, الَّذِينَ يَأْكُلُونَ الرِّبَا لَا يَقُومُونَ إِلَّا كَمَا يَقُومُ الَّذِي يَتَخَبَّطُهُ الشَّيْطَانُ مِنَ الْمَسِّ. That those who take riba, and riba is always envisioned as eating riba. It's called aklu riba. And that's why we put it under, or that's why it's being subsumed under actions of disobedience of the stomach, because it's like you're eating it. So the Quran says that those who take or eat riba, they stand like someone, or they stumble around as like someone who's been touched by a satanic touch. That's the imagery of the Quran. Like that person's been touched by the devil, so they're stumbling along like that. And that's how the Quran describes people who take riba. So it's not a very flattering description of someone who takes riba. Right? He says ذلك بأنهم قالوا إنما البيع مثل الربا. And the Quran says that's because they say that our normal transactions are just like riba, right? So why should it be impermissible? That's more or less what they say. And the funny thing is that the Quran said this. The Quran says this 1400 years ago, and people still say the same thing. Like people say verbatim the same thing. They say today, why is riba impermissible? Like this transaction, which is exactly the same transaction, is permissible. So given that this is permissible, why shouldn't this be impermissible? But that's the exact same argument that the Quran said 1400 years ago is like being touched by the devil, right? So it's curious that it's curious that people continue to say the same thing. The Quran, like I said, it comes down very hard on it, and it's the only crime, or it's the only sin that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has declared war on. Right? It's the only crime that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, فَأْذَنُوا بِحَرْبٍ مِّنَ اللَّهِ وَرَسُولِهِ, that declare war, that let them know that God and His Messenger have declared war on it. Right? So that's مثل أكل الربا وشرب كل مسكر, that's consuming any intoxicant. So even if it's a little, the Prophet ﷺ said that any drink that intoxicates is haram. Okay? So it doesn't matter what its source is. It can be from grapes, it can be from dates, it can be from a synthetic source. All of those are impermissible. The author says, وَأَكْلِ مَالِ الْيَتِيمِ. So this is using the wealth of orphans. This is also one of the 7 sins that destroy a person in this life and the next. The Quran says, إِنَّ الَّذِينَ يَأْكُلُونَ أَمْوَالَ الْيَتَامَى إِنَّمَا يَأْكُلُونَ فِي بُطُونِهِمْ نَارًا وَسَيَصْلَوْنَ سَعِيرًا. That those who eat the wealth of orphans unjustly, that the only thing that they're actually consuming is fire. And some of the commentators on the Quran actually take this literally and say that their punishment in the hereafter will actually be consuming fire. And Imam Razi, he says that the reason that the Quran goes out of its way to take care of the rights of orphans is that orphans are some of the most disadvantaged people. So because they're in such a vulnerable situation, that they're at the height of vulnerableness, so to speak, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala goes to the other extreme and takes care of their rights, or goes to such an extreme in taking care of their rights, that it's an example of God's extreme mercy for people that are disadvantaged or in vulnerable situations. The author says, وَكُلِّ مَا حَرَّمَ اللَّهُ عَلَيْهِ مِنَ الْمَأْكُولَاتِ وَالْمَشْرُوبَاتِ. So the things that we were talking about before, like riba, for example, or using the wealth of orphans unjustly, those are things that they're kind of metaphorical usage of like eating. But here, وَكُلِّ مَا حَرَّمَ اللَّهُ عَلَيْهِ مِنَ الْمَأْكُولَاتِ وَالْمَشْرُوبَاتِ. So anything that is forbidden to eat or to drink also falls within the realm of disobedience of the stomach. So eating things that are clearly that are impermissible, like eating dead meat, for example, eating pork, eating anything that harms the body is also impermissible. So aside from the things that have been clearly mentioned in the Quran, anything that harms the body is also impermissible. So even like classical books of fiqh will also mention, like eating dirt, for example, is harmful for the body, so it's impermissible to eat. And if something is generally not harmful, but for a specific person it's harmful, then that would also be impermissible. So honey, for example, is not harmful to most people, but if we were to envision a scenario in which honey would be poisonous to a specific person, then it would not be permissible for that person to eat it. Right? So all of those things, like he says, مَأْكُلَاتُ الْمَشْرُوبَاتِ, so like drinking blood is also impermissible, and any impurities are also impermissible. Right? And then he says, وَقَدْ لَعَنَ اللَّهُ وَرَسُولُهُ آكِلَ الرِّبَا. وكل من أعان على أكله ولعن شارب الخمر وكل من أعان على شربها حتى البائع لها. So here the author is talking about the fact that anybody who is party to riba interest, or anyone who's party to intoxicants, are also cursed. So there are numerous hadith where the Prophet ﷺ says that where the Prophet ﷺ lists those who have been cursed with respect to riba. So those who take riba, and anyone who's party to it. So not just those who take it, but those who witness it, those who write the contract, those who contract it. All of those people are also cursed by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And the same goes for intoxicants. So the Prophet ﷺ says in hadith that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has cursed not just those who drink it, but those who are party to it. So those who press it, those who process it, those who serve it, those who pour it, those who have it brought, those who transport it. All of those people are, even though they might not be drinking it, and they're not drinking it, they're all party to its production and its consumption. So they're also cursed by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. وَمَعَاصِ اللِّسَانِ. So the author moves on from talking about disobedience of the stomach to مَعَاصِ اللِّسَانِ, to disobedience of the tongue. So he says وَمَعَاصِ اللِّسَانِ كَثِيرًا أيضا مثل الغيبة وهي ذكرك أخاك المسلم بما يكره وإن كنت صادقا والنميمة والكذب والشتم والسب واللعن وغيرها. So the author mentions a bunch of actions that are generally considered acts of disobedience with regard to the tongue. And the tongue, although it's just a small part of the body, its importance is large. Like even for good things. So the thing that differentiates a Muslim from a non-Muslim, the thing that saves a person or not, is reciting the shahada. So the tongue is also, even though it's small in size, its import, like that's the differentiating thing between Islam and kufr, saying the shahada, right? So the tongue has serious importance. The Prophet ﷺ said, "Man kana yu'minu billahi wal yawmil akhir falyaqul khayran aw liyasmut." That whoever believes in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and the last day should say something good or should stay silent. And they say that the scholars who are commenting on this hadith say that saying good is preferable to saying silent. Saying something good is preferable to saying silent, and that's why it's put before staying silent. The two aren't actually equal. That you either say something good or stay silent. No, it's actually better to say something good. No? And the Prophet ﷺ, speaking about the tongue, he said that he asked Mu'adh ibn Jabal rhetorically, like, will people be thrown on their faces in the fire for a reason other than their tongues, or for a reason other than something that their tongues have wrought? So the author said, وَمَعَاصِ اللِّسَانِ كَثِيرًا, and he mentions a bunch of the acts of disobedience of the tongue. And the first one that he mentions is ghiba. And he gives a definition for it. He says it's mentioning your Muslim brother with something that he dislikes, or mentioning something that your brother dislikes, even if it's true. Okay, so sometimes people say, well, the thing that I said about him is true, so it's not backbiting. But it is backbiting. The Prophet ﷺ actually addressed this issue himself, saying that if it's true, it's backbiting, and if it's not true, then it's lying, right? So this mentioning your brother in a way that he dislikes, it can be anything. It could be actually speaking, but it could also be writing. It could be texting. It can be actually scholars they expand the meaning beyond the tongue. So it's not just the tongue. It could be anything that could be understood to be disparaging. So like if you nod your head a certain way, or like you wink, or you use your hands in a certain way, or like you mimic the way that a person walks or something like that, all of those things they consider it ghiba. It doesn't have to be something that a person specifically says. Okay? But all of those things are impermissible actions. Okay? And the Quran prohibits it. The Quran says, وَلَا يَغْتَبْ بَعْضُكُمْ بَعْضًا أَيُحِبُّ أَحَدُكُمْ أَنْ يَأْكُلَ لَحْمَ أَخِيهِ مَيْتًا. Right? So that's after this verse, like a person doesn't need to hear anything more, right? The Quran says that do not backbite your brother. and it compares it to eating the flesh of your dead brother. So like that's the height of revulsive behavior. Eating the flesh of your dead brother is something that nobody would do. So likewise, like speaking about your brother in a way that he doesn't like is something that no one should ever do. Right? The author says, that's the first one that the author mentions, and then he says, وَالنَّمِيمَةِ. And namima is, we already gave a definition of namima earlier in this course. It's transmitting what people say to other people with the purpose of creating problems or causing problems. That's called namima, and it's haram bil ijma'. It's haram by consensus. The Prophet ﷺ said, لا يدخل الجنة نمام. That someone who does this, who transmits what people say to other people for the purpose of causing problems, it will not enter paradise. Right? And the Quran disparages people who do this. It calls them hammazim masha'im binamim, that people who walk around just transmitting information, things that people say. Okay, and Imam al-Ghazali says that namima is usually people saying, like, this person said X and Y about you, right? But he said that the general meaning of namima is just exposing other people's faults, or exposing other people, that things that people didn't want to be known, exposing it. Like, for example, something that you said about someone else is something that you don't want to be transmitted. So likewise, doing something that you don't want to be transmitted to other people, when someone does that, says that person did this or this person does that, that's also considered namima. The author says, وَالْكَذِبْ, lying. Lying is like the opposite. Lying is considered like the opposite of faith, and it's open to, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala curses people who lie. So he says that, فَنَجْعَلْ لَعْنَةَ اللَّهِ عَلَى الْكَاذِبِينَ, that we place the curse of Allah on those who lie. And the Quran says that the only people who lie are people that don't believe. Right? إِنَّمَا يَفْتَرِ الْكَذِبَ الَّذِينَ لَا يُؤْمِنُونَ. That the only people who lie are those people that don't actually believe. Yeah. And the Prophet ﷺ, he mentions a number of characteristics of hypocrites, and one of them is that when he speaks, he lies. إِذَا حَدَّثَ كَذَبَ. So that's it's a sign of hypocrisy. And generally, people should stay away from things speaking about should only stick to speaking about things that they know. They shouldn't try to speak about things that they don't know, because it leads to them lying. Like, people shouldn't try to jump into or engage in every kind of discussion, because it makes them say things that they don't know, and it's difficult sometimes to say that you just don't know something. So if we're going to talk about even like a simple thing, that even if we're going to talk about cell phones, or for example, if you don't know anything about cell phones, then don't jump into the discussion. If you start saying, well, this is better than that because of this and that, and then you have to justify your position, and it's often easier for people to just make things up than to admit that they don't know. And so the easiest way is just to hold back from things that you don't know. Right? And that the Quran actually says that. The Quran says, وَلَا تَخْفُ مَا لَيْسَ لَكَ بِهِ عِلْمٍ. That just stay away from things that you don't know. And then it follows that up by saying, إِنَّ السَّمْعَ وَالْبَصَرَ وَالْفُؤَادَ كُلُّ ذَلِكَ عَنْهُ كَانَ مَسْئُولًا. That all of those things, or كُلُّ أُولَٰئِكَ كَانَ عَنْهُ مَسْئُولًا. Yeah. وَلَا تَخْفُ مَا لَيْسَ لَكَ بِهِ عِلْمٍ إِنَّ السَّمْعَ وَالْبَصَرَ وَالْفُؤَادَ كُلُّ أُولَٰئِكَ كَانَ عَنْهُ مَسْئُولًا. That all of those things will be that you're responsible for. So there's a clear connection between not jumping into things that you don't know and the other limbs, and that's why it draws the connection between the two. The author says, وَالشَّتْمُ وَالسَّبُّ وَاللَّعْنُ وَغَيْرُهَا. So cursing, like cursing in the way that we generally think of when we say cursing, or reviling, or disparaging, or making fun of, or making a mockery, or being sarcastic with respect to other Muslims is also impermissible. It's one of the acts of disobedience. And the Prophet ﷺ said that killing a Muslim is disbelief, but cursing him or making fun of him is fusuq, is iniquity. And the Quran commands us not to make fun of other people or to speak badly of other people, It says, يَا أَيُّهَا الَّذِينَ آمَنُوا. In Surah Al-Hujurat as well, it says, يَا أَيُّهَا الَّذِينَ آمَنُوا لَا يَسْخَرْ قَوْمٌ مِّنْ قَوْمٍ عَسَىٰ أَن يَكُونُوا خَيْرًا مِّنْهُمْ. That, that let not one people make fun or make mockery of another people, because it might be the case that they're better than them. Right? And it says the same thing. For the most part, the Quran doesn't will stick to the male gender because it encompasses the female gender as well. But here, the Quran actually mentions as well the female gender, and it goes on to say, وَلَا نِسَاءٌ مِّن نِسَاءٍ عَسَىٰ أَن يَكُنَّ خَيْرًا مِّنْهُنْ. That females as well shouldn't make fun of other females because it might be the case that they're better than them. Right? So because of the importance of this issue, it actually puts the issue in both genders. In both genders. And the sad thing again is that, like we mentioned, like making fun of people and laughing at people is like a big part of our culture. Is a big part of like Western culture, is to like laugh at other people. At least now. I don't know if it always was like that, but to make a mockery of other people, especially on like YouTube and on Facebook and Twitter and stuff like that, it's very common to just make a mockery of other people, or with like internet memes, for example, that are just designed to make fun of other people. It's not praiseworthy behavior, and it's something that we as Muslims should like hold back from as much as possible. Right? He says, وَاللَّعْنُ. وَاللَّعْنُ, this is different. This is cursing as well, but it's a different kind of cursing. It's like wishing that the curse of God be upon somebody, or that somebody be like eternally damned. That it's not common, but it's impermissible. It's more common in it's more common in the Arabic language. So people that speak Arabic tend to do it more than people that speak English. In English culture, it's not very common. But words that denote the same thing, people should refrain from saying it. It's not permissible to. It's permissible to curse specific types of behavior. So you can say that accursed are specific types of behavior. So like disbelief, doing this, doing that, like taking riba, for example. You could say the curse of Allah is on someone who takes riba, for example. But it's not permissible to curse a specific person. So it's not permissible to say لعنة الله على كذا or a specific person by his name. That is not permissible. Okay, irrespective of what the person has done. And the author says other things. So there are other things that are related to the tongue that are also impermissible. One is going above and beyond all normal boundaries when you're arguing. So some people, everyone when they argue, they get angry and they might say things. But some people, when they get angry, they like go above and beyond like all boundaries, right? And that's one of the things that's a trait that the Prophet ﷺ said is a trait of hypocrisy. Right? He says that وَإِذَا خَاصَمَ فَجَرَ, that when they have an argument or they get into an argument, they exceed all boundaries. Right? And there are other things that are related to speech and to good character, like excluding people from conversations is also poor character and one of the acts of disobedience of the tongue. The author goes on to talk about now acts of disobedience related to the eyes. So he says, وَمَعَاصِ الْعَيْنِ مِثْلُ النَّظَرِ إِلَى النِّسَاءِ الْأَجْنَبِيَّاتِ وَنَظَرِ الْعَوْرَاتِ وَالنَّظَرِ بِالِاسْتِحْقَارِ إِلَى الْمُسْلِمِ وَالنَّظَرِ فِي بَيْتِ الْغَيْرِ بِغَيْرِ إِذْنِهِ. So the eyes are obviously one of the greatest blessings from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and He blessed us with them so that we can see our way, so that we can carry out our daily activities, so that we can consider the heavens and the earth, the signs of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and not so that we can look at things that are impermissible. The author here, he gives the example. He says, مثل النظر إلى النساء الأجنبيات, that looking at women that are outside of a person's family is impermissible. But it's not just impermissible for men to look at women. It's also that are outside of their family. The same goes for women that are looking at men from outside their family as well. It goes both ways. Although the author has specified looking at women in his matan or in his text. All right, and the Quran mentions both. The Quran says, "قُلْ لِلْمُؤْمِنِينَ يَغُضُّوا مِنْ أَبْصَارِهِمْ that tell the believing men to lower their gazes, and also وَقُلْ لِلْمُؤْمِنَاتِ يَغُضْنَ مِنْ أَبْصَارِهِنَّ tell the believing women to lower their gaze as well. The second thing that he mentions, he says, وَنَظَرِ الْعَوْرَاتِ that looking at the awra. So anything that awra is anything that's impermissible to look at. So a man looking at the private parts of another man, for example, is impermissible. Or a woman looking at the private parts of another woman is also impermissible, even if they're family, for example. So that is also impermissible. And he says, وَالنَّظَرِ بِالْإِسْتِحْقَارِ إِلَى الْمُسْلِمِ looking at someone with disdain is impermissible. Looking at someone with that look of disdain is not permissible. And we already spoke about pride and this thing, and this kind of thing. But generally, you shouldn't look down on other people, because you don't know like another person's station. You don't know what another person is like. So outwardly, a person might seem to you to be one thing, and you look at him with this look of disdain, or that you're better than him. But in reality, that person, like their station with God, can be much higher than yours, and you don't know. The last thing that he mentions, وَالنَّظَرِ فِي بَيْتِ الْغَيْرِ بِغَيْرِ إِذْنِهِ looking into someone else's house without their permission. So this is like the issue was actually envisioned, so to speak, when houses were open. So like houses had like open doors and maybe like open windows as well, which they don't anymore. But so you can go up to someone's house and the door might just be an opening in the house, so you can actually see inside someone's house. So that's why he's saying looking inside someone's house without their permission is not permissible. But the same goes today. Like the same goes with like looking in someone's, for example, window. If you can see inside the window, or if they have a glass wall and you can see inside the wall, it's not permissible to look inside. Like people have an expectation of privacy, so it's not permissible to go to look at what they're doing inside, or to take pictures of them, or that kind of thing. To like take pictures of that's another thing that is like it's common today, but it's not permissible. People have an expectation of privacy, a justifiable expectation of privacy. So it's not permissible to take take pictures of people without their permission, and then, for example, post it on the internet and laugh at them. Like that's doing like two things. Like you're breaking their expectation of privacy, which is haram, and you're making fun of them, or you're exposing them. All of those actions are haram. They're not permissible things that people can do. And he says that the author says بِغَيْرِ إِذْنِهِ without their permission, because you don't want to. Like one of the goals of the Sharia, one of the goals of Islamic law is to maintain the dignity of people, is to keep the dignity of people intact. So that's why you can't go looking in people's houses, because you might see something that it's not that A might just be haram for you to see, like seeing someone's awra, for example, if they're not dressed. But it also might be that when people are at home and they're in their comfort zone, they act differently from how they act outside. So you might see them acting in a way differently that changes your opinion of them, right? And it changes your opinion, and it lowers them in your eyes, right? So, for example, a person outside would be dressed a certain way, but when they're dressed at home, they might be wearing, you don't know even if they're covered, they might be wearing something different. So they don't want you to see them in that condition, and you don't want to see them in that condition because it changes your opinion of them. So breaking this barrier is like it's contrary to the goals of the Sharia, and that's why they say, and that's why it's haram. It's haram to do this. طيب. The author says, وَمَعَصِ الْأُذُنِ كَالْإِسْتِمَاعِ إِلَى الْغِيبَةِ وَغَيْرِ ذَلِكَ مِنَ الْمُحَرَّمَاتِ. So the author here is talking about acts of disobedience that are related to the ears, and listening to anything that is impermissible is impermissible. So the like backbiting, for example, it's haram to do it. It's haram for me to sit here and be like, well, this person did this or that, or this person does this or that. But it's also impermissible for you to sit there and listen to it, like because you're being party to it. I mean, if you weren't party to it, then I wouldn't have anybody to talk to, right? So you being party to it is almost like you're assisting it in some way. So If that happens, which it happens a lot where people talk about other people, just you either forbid them from doing it, tell them you don't want to listen to it or don't do it, or leave if it's possible. You don't have to sit around and listen to people speaking about other people. But there are other ways as well that are not as dramatic or drastic. Like if someone starts talking to you about someone else, like you could just avert your eyes, like look away. And that's a social cue that people understand. Like people understand that if they're talking to you about something and all of a sudden you look away, that it's something that you're comfortable with, right? Or if you turn your head, or if you change, like just something about you, the way that you're carrying yourself, that's a clear social cue that you're not comfortable. And people will understand that and they'll stop doing it, right? But if that doesn't work, then you just tell them to stop or you leave, right? And some scholars say that, I think Imam al-Nawawi in Kitab al-Adhkar, he says that that you can, if you're not able to do that, then like actively engage in something else, like internally. So like think about something else, or engage in some adhkar, some kind of supplication internally, so that you're not actually listening to what the person says. The author says, وَمَعَاصِ الْيَدْ كَالتَّلْفِيفِ كَالتَّلْفِيفِ فِي الْكَيْلِ وَالْوَزْنِ والخيانة والسرقة وسائر المعاملات المحرمة كالقتل والضرب بغير حق. So the author now is talking about things that are actions of disobedience that are related to the hand. So the first one that he mentions is what he calls talfif. So talfif is more or less selling short. Talfif is selling short. It was historically it meant like taking something out of the scales. So like if you're weighing something, imagine you're selling something that has to be weighed, for example, on a scale. You would you wouldn't give someone their due. You wouldn't give someone their due, and that's what they call talfif. And it's Quranic. The Quran says وَيْلٌ لِلْمُطَفِّفِينَ, like people that do this talfif. الَّذِينَ إِذَا اكْتَالُوا عَلَى النَّاسِ يَسْتَوْفُونَ. So that if they go themselves to buy something, that they take their full right, right? وَإِذَا كَالُوا أَوْ وَزَنُوهُمْ يُخْسِرُونَ. وَإِذَا كَالُوا أَوْ وَزَنُوهُمْ يُخْسِرُونَ. That if they go to weigh for other people, that they make sure that there's a loss. So like they have this like double standard, that they're always taking their own right, but they're selling other people short. So generally speaking, like selling people short or ripping people off, like that's not a praiseworthy thing. Like it's not something to brag about or to be happy about. It's impermissible. I mean, that's different from getting a good deal or getting someone to give you a good deal. But if it's acceptable to both parties, it's acceptable to both parties. But actually tricking somebody in this manner, it's impermissible. And the Quran says that these people, or people who do this, are people that think that they won't be called to account for them, for that kind of action. It says, أَلَا يَظُنُّ أُولَٰئِكَ أَنَّهُمْ مَبْعُوثُونَ. That don't these people think that they would be resurrected? The next thing that the author mentions that is related to the hand is khiyana. Khiyana is just betraying someone's trust. And the Prophet ﷺ mentions betraying someone's trust as one of the characteristics of a hypocrite. So he says, وَإِذَا تُمِنَ خَانَ, that if he's entrusted with something, that he betrays somebody. So like if I ask you to, if I'm going to the washroom and I ask someone to look at my laptop for a few minutes, and I go to the washroom, I come back and my laptop's gone because that person took it. That's a type of khiyana, that the person betrayed my trust, and it's a sign of hypocrisy. He says, وَالسَّرِقَةِ, which is stealing or theft or taking something unjustly. And that it doesn't really need much explanation. Like everybody knows what stealing is and that it's impermissible. But there are certain things that people do that have like certain types of stealing that have become permissible in our culture that is still stealing, like stealing from your workplace, for example, like taking pens and taking paper and that kind of thing. If it's fine and your employer lets you do that, then that's one thing. But if it's not, it's still stealing, and it's still not permissible. Right? Just because people do it doesn't render it permissible. Right? And he then mentions even bigger things, كالقتل والضرب, like murder and actually physically assaulting people without due cause. Um, and these are very clear, and they don't need any explanation. I mean, if harming someone with your tongue is impermissible, then for sure harming someone by actually murdering them or by physically assaulting someone is definitely impermissible as well. The Prophet ﷺ said that al-Muslimun man salim al-Muslimuna min lisanihi wa yadihi. That a Muslim is a person who other Muslims are safe from their tongue, from their speech, but also their hands. The author says وَمَعَصِ الرِّجْلِ المشي في سعاية بمسلم أو قتله أو ما يضره بغير حق وغير ذلك من كل ما حرم المشي إليه. So the author here is talking about the things that are impermissible or acts of disobedience with respect to the feet. So the first thing that he mentions is this thing that he called si'aya, and si'aya is kind of like namima. Si'aya is like namima, we said, is spreading news about people, what they've said or what they've done, and with the intent of causing problems. But si'aya here is when you take someone's news, but you're taking them to like either a ruler. It was envisioned with like taking someone's news to like the sultan, or to taking it to a king or a ruler. But it could also be, it's informing on people, is really what it is. It's informing on people with the intent of causing them some kind of trouble. So it's like going to the government and saying, you know, this and this person is a terrorist, and it's not true, but just by virtue of you leveling that accusation, you know it's going to cause that kind of that person some difficulty, and possibly serious difficulty. That is haram. That is haram. And they consider it greater than namima, worse than namima, because the potential for harm is a lot more. If I just told you that this person said something about you, it might destroy one relationship. But if you go to someone in an official capacity, their ability to harm this person's life is much greater. They can throw that person in jail, have him killed, and so on and so forth. But generally, using the legs for anything impermissible, like going somewhere impermissible, like if a person is going to somewhere where he'll do something impermissible, using his legs in that manner is impermissible. Okay? And it's one of the acts of disobedience of the legs, using the legs to take you somewhere impermissible. Okay? Just like the Quran says that the steps are recorded. The steps are recorded. They're recorded for good or for bad. So if a person walks to the masjid or goes to the masjid, his legs are the means for which he goes there. His steps are recorded for good. But also if he's going somewhere bad, it's the same thing. So the author says, وَمَعَصِ الْفَرْجِ كَالزِّنَا وَاللِّوَاطِ وَالِاسْتِمْنَاءِ بِالْيَدِ وَغَيْرِهَا مِنْ مَعَاصِ الْفَرْجِ. So the first thing that the author mentions with respect to acts of disobedience, with respect to the private parts, is adultery. It's one of the major sins. It's a major sin after shirk and after murder. It's the greatest sin. And the Quran says, the Quran doesn't just prohibit zina or prohibit adultery. It prohibits coming close to it. So it says, وَلَا تَقْرَبُوا الزِّنَا. So don't come close to adultery. Okay? And the second thing he mentions is al-liwat. Al-liwat is anal intercourse generally. Like it's irrespective of whether the intercourse is same sex or not. In both cases, we would consider it's considered liwat, and it is impermissible. The third thing that he mentions is wal-istimna' bil-yad. Masturbation is impermissible. Al-istimna' is masturbation. It's permissible for spouses. So a spouse can masturbate the other spouse, and that's permissible. And it's also permissible if a person fears adultery. So if a person thinks that they'll commit adultery, because if they don't do this, then it becomes permissible for them to do it. And the author doesn't mention it, but also impermissible is intercourse during menstruation, and also when a woman has postnatal childbirth, postnatal bleeding. Intercourse during those periods is also impermissible. Okay, so the author has finished talking about acts of disobedience that are related to a specific limb. Now he's talking about acts of disobedience that are related to the the entire body. So he says, وَالْمَعْصِيَةِ بِكُلِّ الْبَدَنِ, the acts of disobedience that are related to the entire body are like كَالْعُقُوقِ لِلْوَالِدَيْنِ, like dealing with your, treating your parents poorly. And that's a major sin. The Quran says, وَقَضَى رَبُّكَ أَنْ لَا تَعْبُدُوا إِلَّا إِيَّهُ وَبِالْوَالِدَيْنِ إِحْسَانًا, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has decreed that you don't worship anyone but Him, and that you deal with your parents properly. So the importance of dealing with your parents is so important that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala puts it right after worshipping only Him. Right? And it says, إِمَّا يَبْلُغَنَّ عِنْدَكَ الْكِبَرُ أَحَدُهُمَا أَوْ كِلَاهُمَا فَلَا تَقُلْ لَهُمَا أُفٍّ وَلَا تَنْهَرْهُمَا وَقُلْ لَهُمَا قَوْلًا كَرِيمًا. That if one of them were to attain, if one or both of them were to attain old age in your lifetime, that that don't speak any word of harshness to them, and don't drive them away, but speak to them like a kindly word or a generous word. And this is one of the most beautiful passages in the Quran. The Quran says, وَخْفِضْ لَهُمَا جَنَاحَ الذُّلِّ مِنَ الرَّحْمَةِ, that lower to them like the wings of humility, out of mercy for them. So they say that just like a bird, or just like a mother bird would lower its wings like around the chick in the nest, like to protect it, that should be like the kind of attitude that you have towards your parents. That it's one of protection, it's one of care, it's one of love, and it's not one of anger or hatred or wondering when the person is going to die or that kind of thing. It's the complete opposite. Right? So generally obeying your parents in things that are not that do not entail disobedience is obligatory, and generally leaving aside what they prohibit, if it doesn't entail leaving something obligatory, then it's also that also is obligatory. That generally speaking. The author says, وَالْفِرَارُ مِنَ الزَّحْفِ وَهُوَ مِنَ الْكَبَائِرِ. وَالْفِرَارُ مِنَ الزَّحْفِ is running from the battlefield. So it's someone who is running from the battlefield. If it's obligatory for you to be there or to be engaging in it, leaving the field is not permissible. Like just dropping the action and deciding that you're going to run is not permissible. He says, وَغَيْرُ مَا ذُكِرْ مثل قطيعة الرحم وظلم الناس, that other things that he doesn't mention, but they include anything that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has made obligatory, or that the Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam has rendered obligatory as well. Like he mentions, cutting off family ties is impermissible. So cutting off people from your family is not a permissible course of conduct, even if they've been bad to you, or even if they've treated you improperly. Cutting them off is not permissible. Right? The Prophet ﷺ said that whoever believes in Allah on the last day should maintain his family ties. مَنْ كَانَ يُؤْمِنُ بِاللَّهِ وَالْيَوْمِ الْآخِرِ فَلْيَصِلْ رَحِمَهُ. And he also says that if someone, if it makes a person happy that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala should give him a lot and should extend his lifespan, that again, فَلْيَصِلْ رَحِمَهُ. He says, مَنْ سَرَّهُ أَنْ يَبْسُطَ اللَّهُ أَنْ يُبْسَطَ فِي رِزْقِهِ أَوْ يُنْسَأَ فِي أَثَرِهِ فَلْيَصِلْ رَحِمَهُ. That if someone wants Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to give him more or to extend his lifespan, that he should maintain his family ties. Right? And the author says, وَاللَّهُ الْمُوَافِقُ وَالْمُعِينُ لِمَا يُحِبُّ وَيَرْضَى وَصَلَّى اللَّهُ عَلَى سَيِّدِنَا مُحَمَّدٍ وَآلِهِ وَصَحْبِهِ وَسَلَّمَ. So this is the end of our commentary on Risalat al-Jamia. So وَلِلَّهِ الْحَمْدُ, alhamdulillah, praise be to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, by whose grace all good is accomplished, and we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to accept this from us, our short study of this text, and to render it sincerely for Him and for His sake, and allow us to benefit from it بإذن ta'ala. وصلى اللهم وسلم وزد وبارك على سيدنا ونبينا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين.